We pulled up next to him, and then I shot into the car, shot and killed one man. The rush and exhilaration of like gunshots and the smell of the gunpowder, like all of that tied in, and just this sense of excitement.
Quan did serve time for murder.
So I went in with the life sentence. Okay, I'm gonna die in here.
What changed?
Several things. I stumbled upon books and stories of the saints, and in particular stories of saints that had failed in their lives.
After spending 22 years in and out of correctional institutions, Quan Huynh was paroled from a life sentence.
I think every human being can be salvaged, no matter how many terrible choices they have made.
Quan has been described as a mighty warrior.
I realized I was not born a murderer.
Quan, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to tell your story. Every story starts with your childhood. Can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing?
My early childhood and upbringing, I grew up in Provo, Utah. I'm a first-generation Vietnamese refugee. My father was a South Vietnamese military officer. He trained with the U.S. forces, so he knew the landscape of America. My mother had never seen snow before, so when we lost our country, my father decided to settle us in Provo, Utah. I wouldn't doubt we were the very first Vietnamese family to settle in Utah. I loved being a kid running through the woods, but I also did experience what I do now know to be racism. My father, I always felt loved around him. He created the Vietnamese Refugee Association. And I remember as a little boy, I got to accompany him in these long car rides, so I could always ask him a million questions. And I didn't understand at the time why he was helping other Vietnamese immigrants and refugees settle to our new homeland. He was like my hero. I used to see him on the news because of a lot of the work he was doing in the community, so he was being recognized. So I see him on the news, so he's like my superhero. My mother, on the other hand, has always been very stoic, and a lot of times to me as a little boy her words felt harsh. I don't think she meant it that way, but that's just how it always landed to me as a little kid. Like, oh, that I never was measuring up, I wasn't doing good enough. So that was the distinct differences. One thing though that did make me feel loved with my mother is her cooking. Like she loved cooking for us, and she would just stand over and watch us eat.
What was school like for you in Utah?
School for me in Utah, now I'm thinking about it, I do always remember feeling like I don't fit in. I remember wishing, like, why can't me and my family look normal like everyone else around us? I do remember that. I don't remember much else about school in Utah because that was like until like fifth, sixth grade.
What happened after 5th, 6th grade?
My father got diagnosed with leukemia, and that was when I was 8, and his condition started to get worse. So we decided to move out to California where his family lived.
Did you feel like that was made you angry as a child?
I don't know if it would be angry. I think it was just more confused and like feeling isolated.
What was high school like?
Well, my father passed away when I was 13, and the day that he passed away was the day of our first communion. My younger brother's younger sister, and all of us, I think just leading up to it, our only thing is, okay, the day that we eat the bread for the first time, our first prayer is going to keep our father alive. And I remember that morning when I woke up to get dressed for Mass, my sister is the one that told me, like, oh, I heard Grandma and Mom talking last night, Dad died. And then I went in and told my younger brother, and it was just so bizarre because we didn't talk about it. We went to church pretending that we didn't know my dad was dead, but he was already dead, and my mom and Grandma decided they didn't want to tell us until after Mass, and we already knew the whole time. So it was a really weird experience, and we never once talked about his death again. I mean, like, looking back now, like, we should have went to therapy. Like, this was devastating for all of us, but we never talked about it. And it was just like, we brushed it under the rug, and your father's gone, and Quan, you're the oldest. you have to, and then for me, just felt this pressure. You have to hurry and grow up to take care of your family.
What was like the first understanding that that was what had to happen? Like you had to kind of hurry up and grow up and start helping out? Like what was the first sign?
I think, well, before my father passed away, I was already working, and like at 12, I was already, my first job was as a newspaper boy, and then my younger brother and I already began hustling on the streets because my dad was already in, and we didn't have money to buy shoes or things like that. So, of course, every young kid wants to fit in, and we want to have cool shoes. So my brother and I was hustling just to start to buy our own clothes. And so I think my mom just saw like, oh, these kids are already working. So I think, yeah, just around when he started already going in and out, we already started working and then hustling on the streets. And I remember 13, 14 years old, I already knew how to break into cars. And I remember my mom saw a whole bunch of car stereos under my bed one day, and she's like, oh, what is this? And I just told her, oh, I'm fixing those. So she's, oh, you're such a smart kid. But she didn't know that we were breaking into cars, and just that's how we were beginning to make some type of money to buy our clothes and shoes, and just, just feel like you could fit in school.
How did you learn how to do that?
One of my friend's older brothers, like that was what they were doing. And then I remember I went with them one night, and there was just this rush of excitement and feeling like I fit in with them. And then my friend showed me, here, this is how you do it. And he started showing me how to break into the cars with just a flat Stanley screwdriver. And then from there, I remember then the first time we opened up a glove compartment and there's credit cards, and then the older guys like congratulate, oh, this is what you do now. And they took us to eat. And then later on, so these are just guys that were already doing stuff on the street. They started grooming us, oh, this is the stuff that you do.
What age did you feel like you felt like you needed to go and work and you needed to go and hustle and start to make more money for yourself for these things? Was it was like around the same time your dad was passing?
12, 13, right before my father passed away.
So did you start hanging out with these people more often, the guys that were teaching you how to break into the cars?
Yeah, when I look back at that progression, because I think by the time I was 16, I remember they had printed these payroll checks, and they said, oh, we have this new thing where, Quan, you have a car now, like this is your job, you go to every B of A in Orange County and drop these checks off. Here's the card, here's the debit card. So I knew the PIN, and I remember I just put a hoodie, they just put a hoodie, put a hat on, and we deposit a check, and each check was under $800. At the time, I guess there was a glitch in the B of A system where if you put a payroll check, it's supposed to hold it for 3 days. But since it was under 800, so it was like everyone says $799.98, $795, whatever, like right under 800. And I drew out a map and I hit every B of A. So at the end of the day, there's like 20, 30,000 in it. And then the next day they would bring somebody in that looked like whoever's account, because we were calling it like we were playing the account. They brought the person in to go in and just pull the money all out. And then they pulled the money out. So the next day, when they pulled the money out, then they called me and my friend in, oh, good job, guys. And they give us some money. And then I go buy my video games, and I buy beef jerky. And I was like, oh, and I have extra money at school. And like, oh, I'm kind of cool. I have this thing. So then the thing was to get other local gangs to do like stick-up robberies. But they're laying people down and pretending just to rob the money, but the main thing is to go back places that have the payroll checks, and you're grabbing like the last 10, 12 pages of a payroll thing, so they can't report it, they don't know it's taken, and they take those payroll checks, and then we use those same ones to also deposit. So that was the currency that we were going after, was the payroll checks. So I started learning. They got really sophisticated. I don't know how they knew that one time their house was about to get raided. So they told me, Quan, come over, pick up this suitcase, and I drove over, picked up the suitcase, ran out, and then got in my car, and then the police raided their house. So I had this suitcase in my house for a few days, and I've been looking at it. I was like, man, what is in here? What is in here? So it had just the 3 combination. So like, let me just figure out. So I started 000001, and finally got it open. That's the first time I held a gun in my hand. There was like 2 guns inside. They had more payroll checks. They had a bunch of cash. I just thought like, oh, this is cool. And I started pointing it at the mirror and looking at it, like, oh, this is really cool. Yeah, that was like 16 years old.
Wow.
By the time I was arrested for the first time, they got busted by the feds about 3 months after I was already in for my first arrest. And then I read it on the newspaper. It says organized crime ring is responsible for, I can't remember, defrauding B of A for however, like 20-something million. And I remember like, 20-something million? They had all this money and I didn't, what did I get out of this? Like, we were the ones running in this payroll stuff. Yeah, so I remember that.
But at what point was that? Like what age?
17.
I was around 17. And so that was your first arrest, was before you were 18?
Yeah.
And what happened with that arrest?
I was arrested because my brother and I, because of our experience in Utah, we always had a chip on our shoulder when it came to anybody like professing to be a skinhead or anything to do with like white supremacy. I remember if there were guys with shaved heads or guys walking to school with like swastikas, then we would hit them up. We would purposely try to like hit them up like, oh, you're a skinhead? And then, so they kind of knew like our group. And I think my brother did some burglary with one guy from the school that later on started hanging out with a bunch of skinheads. But that guy told on my brother. We caught the guy that told on my brother at a beach party, and he had a bunch of skinhead friends around him. So my brother called him out to fight, and then some of the other guys were about to jump in, and then I think it was around that time when one of my good friends had just got a 22 gun. When they tried to jump in, he pulled out the gun, and it was only 4 of us, and I think it was like 20-something skinheads, but when he pulled that gun, everybody just backed up, and that's the first time we saw like, wow, just the power of what a gun right here could do. This is like the best equalizer in the world. And that just drew us in. So then after that, everything around us, okay, let's bring the gun with us here, and let's bring the gun. And people started talking about, oh, Quan and his brother and that group, they carry guns. So I think that made me feel like, oh, I'm kind of cool, and I'm legit. A few months after that incident, my brother calls me. I was working at the time at Subway sandwiches, and my brother called me and he said, hey, Gumby, which is the name of the guy, one of the skinheads, and just called our house and threatened to kill Mom. We're gonna find him tonight. So they said, what time do you get off? And I said 10 o'clock. They said, okay. And they stopped by at the Subways and they told me like, yeah, this is what's going on. So then I asked my coworker, hey, do you happen to know where these guys live? So she drew a map. And then she gave it to me, so I shared it with them, and they said, okay, we'll be back at 10 o'clock, and we'll find them, and we'll shoot up the house. That's what we all said. So I said, okay. We had never shot anybody or shot any houses or anything. And 10 o'clock, I got off work. My brother didn't come, and I went home, and my brother was laying on the bed, and he was like under the covers. And I said, what happened? He said, oh, we went to the arcade, and somebody else showed up, and he showed us where the house is. And Red ran up and shot 3 people inside. And he said, like, one of my older friends had ordered the other guy, hey, if they come, I want you to shoot them all in the face. So my brother was pretty terrified, and within a few weeks, they arrested all of us, including me, for conspiracy. They got me for conspiracy because I asked my coworker for the map, and she gave the map, even though that map, they never used the map, and they didn't arrest her because she was white. And I'm thinking, okay, this is just further evidence, like this world is against me. So that's when I went in as a juvenile. That was the first arrest, and then yeah, it was a few months later was when I found out my other friend and his buddies got busted for the federal case.
What was your mom's reaction like by that point?
I think absolutely shocked.
She had no idea anything was going on?
Yeah, she had no idea. Because once my father passed away, my mom was working full time. So she was never home. It was just me and my brother running on the streets. And I mean, school came easy for me like in high school. So my grades always were good. I could just be running on the streets and still get good grades. And there was no red flags for her.
You pleaded guilty?
I pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit a crime. I ended up doing about a year and a half, 2 years in the California Youth Authority. So they sent me up there to the California Youth Authority. But it was like that time in Juvenile Hall, then they charged me as an adult, and I went to the county jail.
Why'd they try you as an adult?
That was just California law. If you're doing a serious crime, if you're over 15 at the time, they could charge you as an adult. My brother had just turned 15, so they didn't try me as an adult, but because I was over 15, they charged me as an adult. Those laws later went down to like I think 14. They could send them to life without possibility of parole.
And what was juvenile hall like?
It was terrifying, but then later on I realized, okay, you find your place. Like, okay, this is your group. You're with the Asians, and these are like. So then some of those Asian groups or gangs I knew of because they were some of the ones that used to do the robberies for our friends. So I kind of knew, okay, I know these groups or these guys, but we didn't all know each other, but we just kind of had to kind of stick together.
What about your relationship with your brother?
Me and him were always close, especially once we first went into juvenile hall. But then when they charged me as an adult, I got taken to the county jail. He stayed at juvenile hall, and later on he went to the California Youth Authority into his own separate path. But there was always part of me like, I wonder what happened to my brother. Hope nothing ever happens to my brother.
How did you spend the time while there, those 2 years?
I read a lot, and then I learned to play cards. I learned to start gambling. I learned from the older guys, like this is how you gamble, and then I got actually pretty good at it. So the older guys always liked to, because they taught me to start counting the cards, so I got good at that, and we used to play. So that made me feel cool. It was like, well, this is an OG coming back from prison that's teaching me how to play spades and pinochle, and he's actually picking me to go gamble, and this is like big stakes we're playing for here. So that was kind of fun.
Were there moments of fear?
I think there was always a moment of fear, constant moments of fear, but I just hide it. Like you don't talk about it and just shove it down. Like I think that was like the first mission that I volunteered for was because of fear. Like what are guys gonna think of me if I don't put my hand up? So they say, oh, who wants to volunteer? And I just, like a dummy, here, I'll volunteer. And then we ended up attacking somebody.
In prison?
This was at the county jail.
Or at the county jail?
Yeah, that's the first time that I actually like saw like how brutal it could be when you beat somebody like really, really bad, and like, yeah, the person didn't even look human anymore.
And so how long after that were you released?
A year and a half, yeah, it was about, because I went in at 17, I got out when I was 19. I mean, it felt like a different world. Like I went in when I was in high school, I didn't graduate high school. Now everybody that was in high school with me knew I went to jail and the California Youth Authority, and then all my experiences in the California Youth Authority with getting in fights and being in riots, and now it's a whole, I saw the world differently, and I felt like I don't fit in with this outside world. So the only guys I knew were the ones that I had that shared experience in there, and those are the guys that later on became like the core part of our gang, because now we're just hanging out. We have this shared understanding, this shared experience of how to, I guess, just show up, and so I remember having that perspective, but then yet, okay, expectations of mom wanting me to go to college and find work, so of course I did that too. So I enrolled in college, and I remember the counselor at the time asked for my high school diploma, and I didn't have one, but then luckily she felt, I don't know why, but I just told her, look, I just got out of the California Youth Authority, and then she had me take the assessment test, and I tested well enough to get like right into English 100, so I didn't have to take remedial stuff. So she was really, I think, for me, compared to some of my friends that got out, they had challenges with their own counselors, with feeling judged or stigmatized.
What happened next? What was your relationship like with your mom and kind of that community that otherwise you had known before that wasn't the gang and what part of the street life?
Yeah, my relationship with my mom was, I mean, I was happy to be home. I think going back to just how she always communicated, like I wasn't measuring up, and like you're home and now you have to take care of your family. Now your brother is still incarcerated, because my brother didn't get out as early as I did. He actually had to do 5 years straight. I got out at like 2 years or something. So, but then I was in college. Like I said, school came easy, so my grades suddenly, I think it was in college where I suddenly felt like, oh, I'm actually, because in high school I didn't feel smart, but in college I go, oh, I could hold my own against people here, and I was actually locked up. So yeah, that's when I started to feel, okay, I could excel and I could do good on tests. Like I'm in classes with some of my friends that were locked up with me, and they were struggling with getting like a C's on the test, and I was acing them. I'm like, oh, this is coming easy for me. So like, okay, I could start trying to apply myself, but I just didn't know where or what, because there was always just this part at the back of my mind, oh, I've been arrested and I can't find work, and it's hard to find work.
And did you want to be in college, or did you feel like you were there just because of the expectations of society?
I think looking back now, I think it's just an expectation of society, like, right? Like you have to have a college degree because somebody successful has to have a college degree, which leads to a good job and all of that. So,
Did you get any work next, or did you go back to hustling?
Where did I start to work? I remember I did a call center, and I was closing a bunch of the sales, but the owner was being shady about like paying me for the sales I closed. Like it never aligned up. So then I got a job at Home Depot. What most likely happened is they ran my background check and it finally came back, and then they used an excuse to let me go. Let me see what else. And then I got a job at the Gallup organization, which I really enjoyed. And then I was really good at that, doing the interviews and calling people and doing exit interviews and things like that.
What brought you back to, I guess, the gang and the street?
Well, the gang in the streets, they were always there because it was like, for me, it was synonymous, like, okay, these are my friends. There was like a dichotomy where, okay, I have my school life and I could show up for like my mom and what she deemed successful. But then there's a part of me like, okay, I really enjoy this nightlife and going out to the clubs and being known as like, okay, this group of guys. And I guess it came to a head when a really good friend of mine, she got killed in a shootout between us and a different group of gangs. That thing really messed me up because I was like, oh, this is like the older sister I never had. And then, I didn't deal well with her death because for me, it just became, okay, I'm just going to go looking for these guys.
So what happened in that situation? And then at what point was this? Were you still in college during this time?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were still in college, and then what happened? With this woman was your friend?
Yeah. We went to a club. I think it was right around her birthday. We went to a club, and then while we were inside a club, another group of guys came in from a rival gang. So then we started fighting inside the club. The security broke us up, and they pushed out the other gang, and they wouldn't let us out. So that meant the other gang was able to get to their cars, which meant they had access to their guns first. They knew my car, so I knew they were going to follow me. So the plan was everybody getting in my car was supposed to have a gun, and everybody else was supposed to sneak off and take off a different way and let them follow my car, because we knew that there was a dead-end street that we were going to try to lay out like an ambush. So one of my friends, we pulled down the street, and I told him, jump out right here, and he was laying there for the ambush, and we went down the dead-end street, and suddenly my friend, she pulled up, and she was drunk, and she was like, oh, where are we going now? And what are you doing here? Things about to go down. And right when we were telling her, and then we could hear the gunshots going off at the back. That was my friend probably shooting them, both sides shooting each other. And I told her, just take off for the freeway. And then her car followed us. And then when we pulled out, we started shooting with the other rival gangs. And I guess they chased us. But then in chasing my car and the other car, I guess they just continued to follow her car. And then her driver, I guess, panicked, and he crashed, and she flew out of the car, and that's how she died. Yeah, she died like on the concrete that night. Yeah, when we came up, she was dead.
I'm sorry. That's tough. How do you recover from that?
I don't think I did. I think that put me in a really dark place. I know the only thing that gave me like any sense of solace, which is really like twisted to think about now, but I didn't feel like I had done her right unless if I found somebody to shoot at like that weekend. And I would go hunting for this other group. And even if I didn't find the other group, if I found somebody else that looked at me wrong or said something, and I used that as an excuse to like pull out my gun and then just shoot at people for no reason.
In that first shootout, what were you getting out of it by being there?
That wasn't my first shootout. I think by that time I had been so ingrained in like the rush and exhilaration of like gunshots and the smell of the gunpowder, like all of that tied in, and just this sense of excitement.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So was that your last gunfight?
No.
What happened in the time between getting to your last gunfight, I suppose?
I got violated a couple more times while on parole, like for gun violations, gang violations. And then I got out the last time was I did a 2-year gun and gang violation because they pulled us over. We were supposed to do I think we had got some new, I can't remember, was it Tech 9s or MP5s, some new automatic weapons, and we wanted to try them out in the mountains, so we needed to get some extra ammunition, and we went to a Super Kmart to buy a bunch of ammo, and I guess it made them nervous. We paid for it all, but then when we came out, the Orange County sheriffs were out there waiting for us, and then it took a while because they wanted to search the car. We said they didn't have the right to, and which they didn't, and then but he knew we had guns in the car, but I guess he went off some law where it says there's ammunition by a car, and if there's ammunition by a car, he had all rights, which later got thrown out because that law was for spent ammunition by a car. But he went inside and they found a bunch of guns inside because of our ammunition, but because I was on parole, I got violated. And then I went in, so I think I did 2 years on that one, and I got out in 98, more angry, more like fuck the world, like this place screwed me over. And then within like a year or something, when I got out, then I went back to work at Gallup, and then that year I was their interviewer of the year. I got the interviewer of the year award. Yeah, and I think by that time I was like one of 4 interviewers that was doing the exit interviews for Microsoft's employees. Like Bill Gates wanted to know like what are his engineers saying, so those were the coolest interviews I got to do. Yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
What was that like? This was like early 2000s Microsoft?
Yeah. No, this was like 98.
98, you were doing interviews for Gallup.
Yeah, this
fresh
is
fresh out of prison.
Before their Strengths Finders book and all that stuff, before they had all that fame. Yeah, back then I think they were only known for the Gallup poll, but we were doing a bunch of studies for like Microsoft and several other companies. So yeah, I got to be the interviewer in that. So then that year they had actually asked me to interview for the management position. And at the time I was going to school at Cal State Fullerton. I was majoring in management information systems because I always loved computers and games and stuff like that. And then, but I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But then when they asked for this interview, for me to interview for a management position, I remember thinking like, finally something's going to go right for myself in this life. Like maybe things are going to go right. And that interview, it's like personality based. Like, what do you think about when you drive home at night? What color matches to this? So it was like all these weird personality-based questions. And then it was about a month later, they had called me into the office, and they're like, hey, we're sorry, but you are not a fit. Like they used the exact phrase, like you are not a fit, which then I think struck a deep part of me, like feeling I don't fit in, you're not a fit in. So I remember just hearing those words, and I'm like, fuck, things can't go right. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I remember I didn't tell my girlfriend, my mom's about it. I did what I knew best at the time. I went down to a bar, got drunk. Within a few days, I had called a couple of my gang buddies. Hey, you guys going out clubbing this weekend or this Thursday? We went up to a club in Hollywood. I brought my gun along, and then when I came out of the club, I saw a fight happening. Some of my buddies were fighting with another group. It got split up, and I remember we parked at a gas station to fill up gas. Then some of my homegirls called and said, hey, those same guys you guys were fighting with are over here. They claim they're from this gang. So I remember I looked across the street and I saw them, and I said, okay, let them follow you. And I go, just pull out to the street and we'll follow them. And then, so we coordinated that. So about 15, 20 miles, they followed us all the way from Hollywood almost to Orange County. And then when I saw that there was no cars on the freeway, we pulled up next to him, and then I shot into the car. Shot and killed one man by the name of Min Nguyen and injured the other 3 occupants in the car.
And who else was in your car?
Just a couple people that were never arrested, so I can't talk about those people.
Yeah, fair enough. Were you driving as well?
No.
So then what happened after you shot the car? Like what did you feel, and then where did you go next?
the women in the other car called me, and they said, "Hey, that car is no longer following us." And that's when I realized like they didn't hear what just happened. So then I instructed the occupants of my car, "Hey, let's not talk about this." Like I told them, "Let's meet up," and I wanted everybody out of my car. So then that's when I checked my car for the gun casings and things like that, and started cleaning up my car. But it was the next day, one of the women's houses got raided, and I guess the other rival gang had written down her license plate before they got shot. So they turned that into the police, and that's where the investigation began. I think about 5-6 months later, I was arrested, and they tried me for the death penalty.
What was that court proceedings like?
Numb. I would feel numb about it. I think for me, I told myself, well, it was my life or theirs, which is all bullshit, but that's how I justified it in my mind.
You pleaded guilty?
No, I did not plead guilty. And even up to the day of trial, the prosecutor, I remember the judge asked, "Are you going to offer a deal?" By that time, I think the death penalty committee had reviewed it and said, this is not a death penalty case, but it's still a special circumstance case. So the prosecutor on the day of jury selection says, the people do not want to offer a deal to the defendant. We want to give him life without possibility of parole. He should never hit the streets again.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so that's what you were convicted of?
No, I went to trial. I was actually convicted of second-degree murder. The jury was not sure if I was the shooter or not, and then they found me guilty of second degree, which meant 15 years to life. The gang enhancements they could not prove because they couldn't prove that it was done for the benefit of a street gang, that I was a gang member at the time, or any of the things like that. So, but at the time it meant a death sentence anyway, because they had not paroled one single life-term prisoner in the state of California since 1977. So I went in with the life sentence, okay, I'm gonna die in here. So it doesn't matter, it's 15 to life or 5 to life or 100 years to life. I was like, okay, I'm gonna die in here, so I'm gonna live the way I wanna live.
What did that mean for you, living the life you wanted to live?
I don't know, like not caring about the rules. Just like if something needs to be done, then we gotta do it. If there's discipline on like people that we have to attack, or if there's fights, or if there's hustling to be doing, like I'm gonna be involved with all of that.
Did that persist throughout your entire time?
No, I think it was about 10, 11 years. That's how I lived.
Did that get you in more trouble though? Like that? Yeah. Would that add time? Could you even add time at that point?
No, because we had a life sentence, so there is no really add time. You could go to the hole, or you could, like, they could take you to ADSEG, take you away from population, or put you back, or threaten to, like. But there was really nothing they could do. I have a life sentence. They can't add more time.
And none of that was miserable to you would it happen? Would you get sent to the hole? No,
because it's just like that's just part of like. Somebody has to be in prison, you have to be written up, and so it doesn't matter, like, I think it was miserable if I couldn't hustle, or, being involved with the gambling rackets, and being involved with hustling for tobacco and the dope, and then later on for the cell phones, so that was all part of what hustling was in prison.
Were you a drug user?
No, I didn't. I was a drug dealer, I was a drug seller, but...
So when did things change then for you?
About 12 years into my sentence.
What changed?
Several things. I remember receiving a picture of my younger brother's daughter for the first time, a baby, and I'm looking at her picture, and it took me back to our child, because it was like she looked exactly like my brother, but just as a baby girl. And then I was thinking to myself, like, how did my life end up like this? Like, am I supposed to die in here? And then, like, how did this all happen? I also got a letter. I can't remember, or found out that my father's father passed away. And then that also made me think about, I think my father passed when he was 37, 38. And by that time I was in my 30s, and like I was contrasting like what my father created in his short time on earth, and then what the hell did I do? And then it just made me feel like, what, like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, those are when those questions first came up. I think, of course, the thing that always gave me solace was still books. And I was always a big bookworm and known to read like 4 or 5 different books at a time. So I was around all of that. And then I had this habit of when I'm reading a book, I get fascinated. If I really draw it into, then I'll look into the acknowledgments of the book and see who wrote the book, see who else influenced the author, and then that also gives me other books. And I just go down these rabbit trails. So it was around that time. I've always been fascinated with books on entrepreneurship. I can't remember what book I read that led me to this book, to that book, and then I stumbled upon books and stories of the saints, and in particular stories of saints that had failed in their lives and then had gone on to create these like legacies and create these orders for the church, which then led me to books on mindfulness and personal responsibility and like all these books, and then meditation, and those became like this new set of books that like, oh man, I feel really free and fascinated by these topics. And it was just, all of that I think became this perfect storm in my head where one day I was on the prison yard when I looked at it. I was looking at the fence, and then I asked myself, like, why do I have to view prison as punishment? Why can't this be a place where I could just remake myself, like how each of these saints or these monks or these other like spiritual warriors had gone on. And I think that's, the sun was coming up over those hills that morning, and I could see the little blades of grass, and I could feel the warmth of the sun, and then up above me in the razor wire, I heard a sparrow chirping. And I tell everyone, like, yeah, probably those sparrows have been chirping my whole prison term, and I never heard it. But that day I heard it, and I would say that's where it began for me, where suddenly I saw, like, wait, these are men around me, some of them much further along in their journey, and some of them perhaps not even awakened yet. But now I felt like, okay, this is not this cold, harsh, ugly place. This is a place that I can begin to rebuild myself. So I think that's where that began. And I remember one of the first things I did was I checked in with a therapist, and that's where I began talking about my father's death for the first time after like 20-something odd years. And then it was inside therapy and understanding that process that I became very fascinated with the grief and loss process. And then, so of course, being the consummate bookworm, I became fascinated with, stumble on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her writings and her teachings. So then that got me a different lens where I started to see around me like all the men in prison are also suffering or also unable to mourn or grieve any of their losses, and there's so much suffering. But then I also saw a way out. I saw what therapy did for me, so I had actually put together a syllabus on grief and loss and submitted it to the prison psychologist, and the psychologist loved it, and we started the prison's first ever grief and loss group. So to be in there and to see men coming in thirsting for like healing and knowledge and being able to mourn and grieve, and seeing tears in men that probably had not shed tears for like 15, 20, 30 years. So that was really meaningful for me, and I think that's where suddenly I saw a different lens, like, wait, this is how I think I want to show up in this world now. And that's what I began to do. I began to get involved with other groups, create other groups, fascinated with reading books on now facilitating and group dynamics and all these other, even delving into like child development and psychology, and then how that led us into like criminal thinking, like all of those things. Like, oh man, this starts to make sense for me, and it just opened up a whole different world. So I think suddenly those next few years, I'm in some forgotten corner of the world. Nobody knows about me, but I felt alive, I felt free, and I felt like I was doing meaningful work, and I'm able to impact that little area of the world that I was in.
The gang that you were a part of in prison, they were okay with you becoming this almost like monk-like figure? Like it just kind of happened naturally?
Yeah, I think several things. I mean, when the time that I walked away from all of that, I mean, I had the person connected to do. I was running the parole tickets for the whole prison for several yards of the prison. I had a connection for tobacco. I had a connection for the phone. So I was connected for all of that. And then when I walked away, it was just like I went back to my Asian car and I was like, hey, I'm done with this. I'm walking away. Who wants the connections? So it wasn't like I was going out backwards where like, okay, police take me off the yard. I have to get off here and let me tell you on everybody that I know of. It's more like, hey, who wants this? I'm done. And by that time I had done enough stuff that nobody was going to say anything. I think it was more if I said I'm done and then started towing the line and doing stuff, then it would have been worse. But once I just did what I wanted to do, then I think the other men got to see like, oh, he is saying what he wants to do.
And your brother, that like almost that postcard or that picture of I think your niece. What happened with his story? Did he didn't follow in your footsteps when he came out of prison or out of jail the first time?
No, fortunately his time during those 5 years I think was really productive for him. He also found himself. Of course, once he came home, because of my, I think I told my homeboys like, never bring my brother into the gang. But of course he hung out with them, but they knew like my brother, he's not going to get brought in. But he hung out with them. He took up their values. And they knew that's my little brother. So yeah, he later on went into real estate. He did very well until the crash.
When you were learning and then you created this program inside the prison, were you still a lifer? You still had no end in sight?
Yeah, because I remember there was a big ruling that came down in, I can't remember, late 2007, 8, or 9. It was a woman prisoner. She fought it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and she basically asked, what's the difference between life with the possibility of parole and life without possibility? Because it doesn't look like California's honoring life with the possibility. And by that time, they had like 30 years of data that backed it up. So then the courts I think they came back with this thing called factors of suitability, where they listed, okay, well, this woman had got her master's degree in prison, had never been arrested. So then they listed a thing, okay, someone can be found suitable if they fit these factors of suitability, like never been arrested, perfect prison record, da-da-da-da. And then they had on the other side, factors of unsuitability. And like when I went down that list, I go, oh, I check off all of this. So regardless of this ruling to help, they're never going to let me out. And they're never going to let out the vast majority of us because who hasn't gotten written up in prison? And there was all these things. But that was, I think, where it began, the small crack opened. After that, men began to litigate, and then it happened more. Now the courts are looking, what's going on in these parole hearings? How are they still saying they're not suitable? So it began to start opening up.
And when was your moment?
Of parole? 2015. I went to the board for the second time, and I think after when they had seen like the groups I'd been involved with, everything like that, to hear like they're reading the regular thing, and I didn't know. I thought I was going to get denied, and suddenly they said, we find that the prisoner is not dangerous to society. I can't remember the exact word. I was like, what? And I looked at my attorney, like, oh my goodness, they found me suitable.
And how long after that was it that you were released?
5 months, because there's a 5-month process that the governor has to review. They have to review everything. So I remember that 5 months, I intentionally told myself, it's 150 days that I'm going to be here. I have to mourn the relationships that I've built. I have to basically mourn the death of all of these friendships that I've had, because I may never see these guys again. So I remember intentionally being there for each guy and just spending time and not worrying about the streets. Like, I'm here, I'm present right now. Let me enjoy these last 150 days in prison.
Was it enjoyable?
It was. I think of course, there were some disappointments because I think some people didn't deal well with also me leaving, and them not being able to express it. So then it came out in other ways where which is also normal, but yeah, kind of disappointing.
You eventually go on to write a book. I'm curious, like, when did you go from being reader to writer?
Well, I mean, already in Utah, I used to like writing. As a 12-year-old in junior high, I was recognized for creative writing, and then they sent me to UCI's creative writing school for the summers. But then it was in prison when I joined, the last couple of years before I left, I joined this creative writing group. And I remember reading my first story I wrote in the group out, and it was like absolutely quiet. And then, like, you know, the nervousness of, oh my God, what are people thinking? It's too quiet. And the guys turned around, they were looking at me when I got done reading, and they're like, oh, you're a really good writer. And that was the last thing I thought they were gonna say. They said, how long have you been writing? And it was that moment I realized, oh, I used to like to write. But why did I stop? And I realized I stopped writing after my father died, so I didn't write like all those years. But I did begin to write when the light came on for me, like after my sparrow in the razor wire moment. I began journaling a lot. So that was where a lot of my like thoughts I could pour in, I could start examining them. The journaling part was where I think I really was able to start, let's say I could take inventory of my day, what worked well and where could I improve, and like what did I fail at today, but intentionally telling myself where did I fail at to just be okay with failure. Let's say I'm reading a concept in a book and I want to practice it, and then realizing, oh, okay, this is running it through my mind. This is what I could have reacted differently. And then I think examining my thoughts actually and writing them down, actually, I had other opportunities that came up where then suddenly, I don't know how to describe it, like time could slow down for me in response to conflict or in response to conversations, whereas before I'd be quick to be very harsh or critical of people, and now I could say, oh, the old me would want to say this, but now I could see my mind wanting to say it, but I could just keep my mouth quiet and just push that thought away or push out the tendency to want to say something harsh or demeaning, because it doesn't help and it doesn't build anybody up. So yeah, whereas before that was me like really quick to this.
So 2015, you get released, and what is life like coming out?
Shocking, a lot of color, a lot of happiness, some disappointments. I think the first week I barely slept. I remember the first night, it was too quiet, too dark. I'm used to hearing like somebody shuffling to the toilet. You could hear the sandals. I was used to hearing the keys of the guard walking, the institutional toilets like flushing. There's always that dim yellow light. And then at my brother's house, it was absolutely quiet, totally dark. And then I wake up and I'm excited. Like, oh my God, I'm not in prison. I remember turning on the TV. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and didn't know how to work the remote because it was like a million channels. And I'm looking, I go, where's PBS? Why can't I just get onto a regular channel I know? And it was like 100 channels, and trying to go back to sleep, and then waking up again like close to dawn, and then decided, okay, I want coffee, and I'm looking all through the cupboards and I can't find like instant coffee. Then I see the coffee machine and I don't know how to work the coffee machine. So just like, yeah, like just difficulty from day one of just readjusting to technology and everything else out here.
What about finding work? What was that process like?
I was very fortunate because my brother had his real estate firm. So the very next day, my brother took me to, they took me to their work routine, which started with early morning yoga and then going straight to his real estate company. And so from day one, the day after I got released, he started teaching me what they were doing at his real estate company.
What was the process of learning about Defy, which is your current employer?
I actually joined Defy when I was still at Solano State Prison. We heard about this brand new pilot program coming out of New York called Defy Ventures. And one of my buddies, he came into my work one day and he had this packet. He goes, oh my God, you missed out on this craziest presentation. There's this new group right here. I know you'll love it. It's about entrepreneurship. And he handed it to me. And it was like a 30-page application. And it says like, why would you be telling me about your journey, about a journey of transformation, and What about entrepreneurship excites you? And I had all this stuff. So I like, oh my God, this is like perfect in alignment with how I want to show up in the world and be part of a group. So I enrolled in that. And then I remember I enrolled and I got to the first business coaching day, and they said they were going to bring in a bunch of volunteers, but I've heard people say that, and then suddenly that day there was music, and they brought like 40, 50 volunteers, and I saw all this color and this these smiles and like all these amazing like people that were like, oh, I worked at Google, oh, I work at eBay, and so basically, yeah, that was my first exposure. Like, oh man, this is really cool.
What year was that?
That was in 2015.
So that was pretty close to your release.
Yeah, I joined Defy, and then I was found suitable, I think, and then 150 days later, I was released. So I released before the pitch competition.
So you didn't get to do the pitch competition?
I didn't get to that pitch competition inside, but then I continued with Defy. Once I got out, there was a program that they were doing in Northern California. I was in Southern California. And they had me fly up to San Francisco, and I did my pitch up there. Yeah, you want to talk about the worst pitch in Defy's history? That was me on that on that pitch. And then
what did you pitch? What was the idea?
So okay, I'll back up and I was doing a bunch of Defy's coursework, and my brother's real estate company. I found out that they were looking for a new cleaning company. The building owner was looking for a new janitorial services. Because I remember when I first came to work with my brother, I used to work at the prison hospital, so we used to clean the hospital. I used to, I had an eye for looking at the baseboards, and that's always what you do to make sure the place looks clean. And I told him, man, this janitorial company here sucks. Why don't you create a company, and I know how to manage it, and I'll run the team. And my brother at the time was like, oh, well, you can't just create a company like that. And then I found out that the building owner was looking for a new cleaning company. So one of the things that Defy, like part of being a pitch is like you introduce yourself, you know, my name's so-and-so, I'm the CEO and founder of this. So then I was like, okay, if they're looking for a cleaning company, I have to find out, I have to find a name for my company. So I got onto GoDaddy. I knew that's how you look for a domain name. And I started looking up, I said, gold janitors, platinum janitors. I wanted something to sound valuable, and those were already all taken. And then I said, what about jade janitors? Like Asians, we love the jade stone, and that's also very valuable. So jadejanitors.com was open. I think it was $9.99. So I purchased the domain, and then I had the building owner's email. So I emailed him and said, my name's Quan Huynh. I'm the founder and CEO of Jade Janitors. I used to work at a hospital up in Northern California, and I know how to proper cleaning things. And he says, can you give me a copy of your business license and certificate? I didn't know what that was or how to get it, so I asked some family, and they said, oh, you have to go to the county courthouse, you have to file in the city. So I did it that day, scanned it and sent it to him. He says, can you give me a copy of your janitorial insurance? I didn't know what that was, so I got onto Google. It says, what's the standard janitorial insurance? It gave me different policies. Then I found one that I could purchase. I think it was like $400 to purchase the policy. I have to sign it for a year. It's $80 a month. So that was the point. I was like, okay, this will be my first gamble right here, because $1,200, $1,300 for this thing. I don't even have a contract. I have no employees. I don't have a company. I go, but I think if I land this contract, it will pay for itself right there. So I purchased that, and then the building owner says, can you give me a quote for the building? And since I worked in the building, I already knew how big it was. And so I remember telling myself, oh, this will probably take me 3 hours to clean. I'll pay a person 4 hours to clean here. This is what I'll pay them. This is the margin I want. And I sent off the quote. And they said, can you guys start Friday? And that's how I landed the very first contract. So I had that company already, flew up to San Francisco, but the business that I pitched was the same one that I pitched when I was at Solano, was team building training for like middle level managers, because that's what I was really fascinated with, like how do you build culture, how do you build team, and how do you make it a safe space for teams to to really support each other, and especially with managers and things like that. Like I said, worst pitch in Defy's history. And I remember flying home, I said, why am I pitching a company that I have not created? Why don't I pitch a company that I already am running and I could fine tune it, and all these lessons I learned with this, I could apply it to other companies, and then I could create the other company later on. So yeah, I think the following pitch competition, I flew out to New York and I pitched about my J janitors, and I got second place.
So at what point did you go from just like being a graduate of Defy to then working with Defy?
2017, Defy was expanding out to Southern California to build out a Southern California chapter. Back then, they only had a Northern California chapter. So they were expanding out here to Southern California. By that time, I was getting burnt out like in real estate with my brother's stuff. It felt like it wasn't meaningful for me, like it was work. And we had also launched my family's restaurant like 9 months after I got out. So I was there with them from like concept of it to like daily operations, and I was the main one doing the employment interview. So it was like, yeah, I got to help manage the restaurant. But then when I found out Defy was expanding, I was like, man, I think I want to go back to that work that felt meaningful for me in prison, and being involved with stuff like that. So I interviewed for Defy, got the program manager position, and I was tasked with building out like what does it mean for reentry and post-release. And yeah, that was 2017. And then just over the years, my roles and responsibilities have grown. And I think, what was it, about 2 years ago, I stepped into the role of executive director for Southern California. And now we are the largest chapter nationally.
It's pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. Can you tell the story of the exercise that you do in Defy of walking up to the line and the questions around that, and kind of like the impact it had, especially when you see it, and you know, what does that do for you now?
You're talking about step to the line. That is our empathy building exercise, where one side has men or women that are incarcerated, the other side has our volunteers. I had done that exercise in prison. Because of my facilitating work, I had done quite a bit of similar exercises, so I know how impactful and how connected those exercises can do for people. But I think those are great ways for people that have totally different experiences, life experiences, occupations, whatever, to find commonalities. And I think just find the humanness in each other.
Like, what are like some of the questions?
Yeah, some of the questions be like, okay, if you like country music, step to the line. If you like scary movies, step to the line. And then we start digging deeper and deeper and stepping into it. And then going into like, if you heard gunshots in your neighborhood growing up. Step to the line if your one or both of your parents told you they loved you. Step to the line if your parents have ever been incarcerated. And just continuing to find different reasons why people step up or don't step up.
It's incredible. Like, as a volunteer, having done it, just seeing like all of these men who are incarcerated like cry when they see realizations of like, wow, like I was, you know, my childhood was so impactful to like the decisions I ended up making in life. Mm-hmm. Is there a specific story of someone that you worked with that like is so impactful that like you feel like you've got to share it?
So Stanley was a man that I met at the Hatchapee, where we were kicking off a brand new cohort there. So when we went in, we're there to tell the men about like what our program is and who we are. And then I see this man come up. His name is Stanley, and he's like, I don't believe you're here. I just got done reading your book. He had tears in his eyes. And then he turns to our career manager, who was also formerly incarcerated and had also disclosed that he had done 26 years. And he's like, and now I get to see 2 lifers in front of me that are now home. Like, I want what you guys have. Is it possible for me? He goes, I don't speak English well. Can I do this curriculum? And we assured him, yes, if it's not going to be easy, but you can do the curriculum, but more importantly, this is going to be one of the best decisions of your life. And to be able to see Stanley's progression, like each time I used to go back in and see that joy that he began to exude, and then just to see him at the final pitch, And not only did he graduate, but then we got to tell him at the pitch competition on his day of graduation, like he got 100 on his like final, which was extremely difficult, and he got 100. And then for him to share, you know, like, okay, that he's a lifer, he may never go home, but Defy's taught him now how to die with dignity. And that was like, yeah, that was for me one of the best proof of concept that we see of how you could see the transformation. Like I got to see it from the beginning of him to like this new man product, and then for him to tell me at the graduation, hey, I want more of Defy. Do you think it's possible if I come back as a peer facilitator? And I was like, yes, please apply to become. And he's like, do you think I can do it? And I'm in my head like, this would be the most amazing peer facilitator to help support the next cohort. And he still didn't see it yet. But to see so much like beauty in this guy and what it did compared to who he was when he first came.
What does redemption mean to you now?
Redemption, the possibilities to live a meaningful life. I think every human being can be salvaged, no matter how many terrible choices they have made. I think for me, there was a realization one day when I realized like I was not born a murderer, so it was because of these series of wrong choices I made over the course of my life. So I think in reverse engineering that, if I began to make correct and intentional choices each day from then on out, then I could become a better human being. Well, of course, I think going back, there's possibilities of redemption, and like I said, every human is salvageable. I think dehumanizing somebody with words like felon, and murderer, ex-cons, like all those things that can be dehumanizing.
But can you share some of the success, I guess, like from a recidivism standpoint that Defy has been able to accomplish? And
yeah, to give you context, I think California historically, right now it costs $132,000 to incarcerate one human being for 1 year. That's more than the cost of a 4-year college tuition, right? On some tuition, and yet in that 1 year, so times about however many years they do, and then you should be preparing them for reentry. But then once they come home, within 3 years, 67% of those men or women will be back in prison. Contrast that with Defy's numbers, which I'm very proud of. We run cohorts of 50 men or women through our program, which costs about $85,000. And you can contrast that $85,000 or 50 men and women at $132,000 for 1 year. That's like what, 6.6 million. So 85K versus 6.6 million, and we have. Our men and women have a recidivism rate of less than 15% going back. And I see it firsthand. Once they come home, it's just the hunger and the thirst, and I think even in our program, we really teach them like, you are valuable. There, you can contribute to your communities. You can dream. There's bigger possibilities than just working a 9 to 5, or there's bigger possibilities than just working like, oh, you're not just going to do construction. You can do many other things. You can do whatever you want to pursue, and to see them embody it once they come home.
how do you kind of maintain your relationship with all of these people? Like when you go through that process of helping someone in prison and then they come out afterwards, I know that there's like a degree of separation for volunteers, but how do you balance that and like, you know, the presence that you have in all of these people's lives?
Well, I think the best part of my job is to get to tell a man or a woman, like, welcome home. Yeah, seeing them and then actually seeing them come home and get to the welcome home. I mean, yeah, because as a volunteer, as a Defy staff, and as an author, like I get quite a bit of mail from the men and women that are incarcerated. But because of my position at Defy, like I don't write them back. I can't write them back because I'm going back in. So then it's a gray area where it could jeopardize. So, but I tell them, like, I read all their letters, and every time I walk in and I walk out with a piece of mind, it's like, this is why I do this work. I'm going to continue to still advocate for them. I'm going to push for employers to hire, to change their practices, push for lobbyists to support our work, push for foundation and corporations to continue to help us do the work that we get to do.
And what can individuals do to kind of help support, one, Defy Ventures, and then two, to support you and in your work?
Well, I think first, if they want to see what we do firsthand, like join us in prison, like come in with us. I think that'd be the first way to see. Like, what better way to shatter the narrative that that a person may have told himself out here, like these are prisoners, they should be locked up forever, those are murderers, these are, like, those are the worst of the worst. And then you go in and you just see these are just human beings. Some of them have made very terrible choices, but at the end of the day, they're still human beings. And I think at the end of the day, like, what do we want our future communities to consist of? You want to lock them up forever, they're not going to be locked up forever. So why not invest in them while they're inside, so when they come home, they can give back like 10, 20-fold to their communities.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time, telling your story. And then, of course, people can support you by buying a copy of your book, the title of the book in full.
Sparrow in the Razor Wire.